about that. My, I don't know what caused this, but my PC crashed. Oh, wait, hold on. Gotta make another tweet saying, "We're back." My PC crashed, but we're back now, Lamau. There we go. I swear, if it happens again, I'm gonna blow a gasket. Alright. Oh, my chair feels too far back. 1 second. Ah, sorry if you heard that. There we go. There we are. Okay. I'm gonna wait a little bit before getting into the reading. I just want to... I don't think it will, but I just want to see if a notification gets sent out again. And wait for any potential people to come in. Okay. So, what can we do in the meantime? So what did I do today? I mean, I didn't do much. I meant to wake up at like 10 or so, but I guess I didn't set my alarm at the right time and I overslept. And I woke up at 11:30. So that was fun. Well, there we go. It does send out another notification. I think. Or maybe not. Okay. But I mean, we should be good now. I think now is a good time to start back up again on The Stars and Their Children. Alright. The Stars and Their Children is, of course, written by Bones and the Bees. You should go check out the rest of their stuff. I read Tommy and His Clinic for Supervillains, Nocturnal Animals, and Under the Brine. Not in that order, but yeah. On stream, and I have loved her works. So, she is an amazing writer. Sorry, that was a yawn. I promise it's not actually boring. Just a bit exhausted. No big deal. Anyway. Chapter 6. A guillotine waiting to be dropped. Summary. Days pass by. No warnings for this chapter as far as I know. Okay. As Nikki straightened up from her curtsy, Eric glanced between her and Wilbur, pursing their lips. I believe we should allow the children to get to know one another before we begin our meeting. Would it be alright if Prince Orpheus were to take Lady Niichu on a tour of the palace? Eric asked, raising an eyebrow at the woman. The woman's eyebrows twitched, but after a beat, she nodded. I suppose so. Eric then turned to Wilbur, crouching down to hand Tommy over. Here, take your brother and Lady Niichu on a tour. I'll have the servants find you when I need you again. Wilbur nodded, taking Tommy into his arms, who grumbled in tired protest at being moved, before he settled himself into Wilbur's hold. His soft baby hairs tickled Wilbur's chin and made sure Tommy was secure before he gestured for Nikki to follow him. She followed without a word. On their way out, Wilbur shot Aerith a grateful look, and they gave him a small smile before turning back to the ambassadors. Once they were outside the hangar, Wilbur breathed a sigh of relief. The women from Themis scared him, and he was glad to be out from under that one woman's sharp eyes. Now, though, he was with the emissary. Oh, sorry. A girl who couldn't be any older than he was, and he had to take her on a tour. Great. What was he even supposed to show her? Lady Niachu, is there anywhere you want to see first? Wilbur asked once they were far away from the hangar, both their shoes clicking against the smooth stone floors. Nikki flinched, as if she hadn't been expected to be addressed. I'm not sure what there is to see, Prince Orpheus, she said quietly, keeping her eyes down. Oh yeah, you probably should have figured that. He adjusted Tommy in his arms again as he tried to think of where he could take her. The residential wing? He could, but that was boring and she'd surely see it later anyway. The playroom? She'd see all of Tommy's toys there and might think he played with them too, and he didn't want her to think he was a baby. Well, the observatory was always cool. Follow me, Wilbur told her, flashing a small smile as he picked up the pace of his walking. Nikki began to walk faster as well. She kept close to him as he led her down the twisting hallways, and Wilbur noticed that her eyes were wide, something like curiosity flickering in the silver. But she didn't say anything, so Wilbur didn't either. Miraculously, Tommy stayed asleep through the entire walk to the observatory. As they stepped through the arched doorways, Nikki let out a gasp, and Wilbur couldn't help but smile. In the center of the room, the orrery glittered in gold and silver, the colorful planets rotating in their lazy circles as they always did. Outside the large windows, the rose sky was decorated with flickering stars, and Nikki immediately gravitated to the glass. This is the observatory, Wilbur told her. Do you have one of these on Themis? Nikki's fingers tapped on the glass, her silver eyes fixing on the rustling of the sulfurwood trees outside. I think there's one in the palace. I haven't seen it though, she said, not looking at him. Wilbur frowned. Why not? I've only been in a few meeting rooms inside the palace. I don't live there, Nikki told him, turning away from the window to walk towards the orrery. People say it's really pretty though. You don't live in the palace? Nikki shook her head. Only the royal family can live in the palace. Oh. For some reason, Wilbur had assumed she was part of the royal family in some way or another. How old are you? Wilbur then asked. 8. Wilbur grinned. Me too. I'm glad you're my age. I thought the emissary was going to be some boring adult. He readjusted Tommy again, wincing at how his arms were already aching from holding him. Tommy's only 3, so he's just a baby. He's kind of cool, but he can be really loud sometimes. Nikki giggled, turning away from the orrery to look at Tommy. He seems pretty quiet. He's quiet right now because he's tired, but he's not, trust me. As if he could tell they were talking about him, Tommy lifted his head from Wilbur's shoulder, eyelids drooping as he sleepily blinked at him. Then, he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Wilbur's cheek and reaching a hand up to pat his nose. "Wilby," he whined, his words slurred from sleep. "I'm tired." "I know, Tommy. Just go back to sleep." Tommy's small face scrunched up, as if he was considering Wilbur's offer. But then he glanced behind, noticing Nikki for the first time. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing a pudgy finger at her. "That's Lady Nikki Nearchew," Wilbur told him. "She's going to be hanging out with us a lot." Tommy's frown deepened, which was pretty funny to see on a toddler. "I'm Key," he said after a moment. Nikki giggled while Wilbur sighed. "Nikki Nearchew." "Nimekey," Tommy repeated. "You can call me Nimekey," Nikki said, smiling now. "I don't mind it." Seemingly pleased at this, Tommy nodded once before pressing his forehead against Wilbur's cheek again. He babbled something that Wilbur couldn't understand, but he was pretty sure it was another complaint. "Just go back to sleep, Tommy," Wilbur whispered, bouncing him up and down a bit in his arms. Huffing loudly, Tommy bumped his forehead into his cheek again. "Kiss." Wilbur snorted and turned his head to press a kiss to Tommy's forehead. Finally satisfied, Tommy then laid his head back down against Wilbur's shoulder, and Wilbur gave Nikki an exasperated look. "He'll figure out how to say your name eventually, Lady Nearchew. He can say Wilbur perfectly fine, but he insists on saying Wilby." "Sounds like he's stubborn," Nikki commented, although her words were fond instead of scolding. "I've been told I'm not stubborn enough sometimes." "I can help with that. I'm also really stubborn," Wilbur said proudly. "Tommy gets it from me." Nikki was smiling widely now. "Teach me how to be stubborn, then." "Oh, I will, Lady Nearchew," Wilbur shot back. So far, he liked Nikki. She seemed nice and even laughed at his jokes, and she was the same age as him. Wilbur couldn't remember the last time he'd gotten to hang out with someone his age. Even though he loved Tommy, he was also still a baby, and kind of sucked to hang out with. "By the way, you can just call me Nikki, Prince Orpheus," Nikki then said. "Oh, thank God," Wilbur breathed. "The formal names are so weird. If someone's close to me, they can only call me Wilbur, and him Tommy. Since you're gonna probably be my new best friend, you can call us both those names." Nikki raised her eyebrows in surprise. "I'm your new best friend?" "You're gonna be with me all the time, right? Since you're the emissary and all." Nikki nodded, and Wilbur smiled. "Then that means you're my best friend. Aren't best friends supposed to hang out all the time?" "I suppose so," Nikki giggled. Although I've never had a best friend before." "Neither have I. We can be each other's first best friends." The next few days were odd. Not necessarily in a bad way. Nothing unpleasant happened to Wilbur and Tommy as they got used to Zephyr's 4 and explored what the palace had to offer. If anything, it was almost a relief. A chance to take a much-needed reprieve from the stress of the past week. No, what was odd was exactly that. It was a reprieve where nothing happened. Nothing. Of course, Wilbur shouldn't have been surprised by this. Sorry. Phyllis had told them he was going to be too busy to see them, but it felt wrong to be hanging around the capital of the Antarctic Empire with no clue how they were going to proceed with their negotiations from there. It was a bit like hanging in purgatory, waiting at the steps to the guillotine, wondering if they were going to be ordered to place their heads under the blades, or if they would be allowed to walk away. Tommy didn't seem to mind this purgatory as much as Wilbur, or maybe he was just better at hiding it. But either way, he seemed relieved to spend his days letting Amesy show him around the palace, dragging him down hallways and into small rooms filled with things like old armor and clothes of all shapes and sizes. Meanwhile, Wilbur, Jack, and Rombu would follow behind like awkward ducks in a line. Except Jack wasn't so much awkward as he was annoyed, and Wilbur just didn't want to let Tommy out of his sight. So it was really only Rombu who was awkward, which Wilbur was beginning to think was his default state of being. Rombu was a strange kid. He was careful not to falter with the names again, mostly only referring to Wilbur and Tommy as Your Highness, even when Tommy reassured him he could just call him Theseus. He often tripped over his own words, hands fluttering about while he stumbled through clunky sentences like he wasn't sure where to put them. But when he managed to spit out what he wanted to say, he was often sharing small quips that were actually pretty funny, or giving insightful comments about whatever part of the palace they were in at that moment. He hung around Tommy more than he hung around Wilbur, which made sense given they were closer in age. Rombu had told him on their third day that he was 16, and Tommy complained loudly about being the youngest in the group. Hold on, gotta check something. Often during their walks through the palace, Amesy, Rombu, and Tommy would take the lead, while Wilbur hung back with Jack. This was surprisingly beneficial, but not just for the chance of conversation with someone closer to his own age. Instead, these talks gave Wilbur something far more valuable than just a shallow sense of companionship. And so then I'm like, you're a fucking idiot. You're gonna freeze solid if you go out there. And then the bloke tells me, nah, mate, I'm built different. And, like, I get being built different because I'm definitely built different. But no one is built to withstand those winds on the surface. It's fucking cold as shit out there. And this idiot nearly froze solid before we managed to get a rescue team out to drag him back in, Jack was saying, waving his hands wildly around his face as he spoke. Wilbur, who was watching Tommy run down the hall to chase after Amesy, hummed. What a fucking idiot, he huffed, shoving his hands in his pockets. I didn't even grow up here, and I can tell going out on the surface is a terrible idea. Jack nodded. Exactly! But that's kind of the thing. You live here your whole life, and you get a little too cocky about it all. Like, you go out on the surface once you're in your full snow gear, and you think to yourself, oh, it's not that bad. But even with full gear on, the longest you can be outside for is 5 minutes. This dumbass wasn't even wearing his snow gear, and he thought he could make it a full 2 minutes. You seem to know a lot about the specifics of this stuff, Wilbur commented, keeping his face neutral as he watched Amesy tug Tommy over to a large window that looked out over the city. The exact times and all. Anyone who joins the Royal Guard or the military has that stuff drilled into their head, since one of the only reasons you'd go to the surface would be either for military or guard-related stuff. And anyone can join the Royal Guard or military here? Or are there specific requirements? Well, just about anyone can join the military if you're a citizen of Zephyr's 4, and citizens from other planets in the Empire mostly can join too. They just have to go through some interviews and shit, Jack explained, straightening his shoulders. But the Royal Guard is different. You gotta go through lots of training for this job, and you can't just apply outright. You gotta get recommended by a superior officer in the military. The pride was practically dripping from his words, and Wilbur fought to hide his smile as a gold-lined path was laid out in his mind's eye. Is it unusual for someone as young as you to land a job in the Royal Guard? Oh yeah. I'm one of the youngest guards we have, Jack told him, grinning widely now. Joined military training when I was 16 and got recommended for the Royal Guard when I was 17. That doesn't happen to most people. You're allowed to join the military at 16? Wilbur asked, raising his eyebrows. Kind of. You wouldn't actually get sent out for active duty until you're at least 18, but you can start training and take up a position in the base here, though you pretty much just do grunt work. They turned a corner, and Wilbur watched Rambu point at some random door before diving off into a tangent about presumably whatever was behind it. Wilbur couldn't hear it from where he was standing, but judging by the glazed-over look in Tommy's eyes, it probably wasn't anything particularly useful to know. Something... Foreshadowing! That's foreshadowing! There's gonna be something important behind that door. I'm calling it right now. So instead, Wilbur kept his focus on Jack. Why did you join the military? Jack shrugged. I mean, it's a pretty sweet gig. You get food, a place to live, and a damn good salary. Wilbur tilted his head to the side at that. Is finding jobs difficult here? I wouldn't say it's difficult, but you don't have a ton of options. If you're smart, you become a doctor or a teacher. If you get at building, you become an engineer or a metal welder. And if you're strong, you work in the mines. Those are the jobs that are easiest to get into down here, Jack explained, glancing at Wilbur. If all that sounds dead fucking boring to you, you go into the military. Mines? Wilbur asked, furrowing his brows. Yeah. Have you not seen the mining tunnels? Jack questioned. Wilbur shook his head, and he scoffed before leading Wilbur over to the window the kids had been at earlier. The city looked the same as it had the first day Wilbur had rode the train into the palace. The sharp metal points on top of the building stretched towards the even sharper ice spikes dangling from the ceiling. A few so close it reminded Wilbur of two hands reaching out, just barely brushing their fingertips together. Along the ground, there was more metal sprawled out into a crowded metropolis, and his eyes skimmed the entire view, searching for the mines Jack had mentioned. Look at the walls of the cavern, Jack said after a few moments, pointing out the window. Shifting his gaze to the right, Wilbur eyed the rippling blue and white patterns of the ice cavern wall, letting his eyes fall until he finally spotted what Jack was talking about. Sure enough, there were dozens of tunnels carved into the ice that branched out in different directions, probably leading much further out than Wilbur could even imagine. You're a mining planet, Wilbur said, unsure how he hadn't been aware of that before. Jack nodded. Yep. Lot of minerals under all this ice. Committing that small fact to memory, Wilbur nodded before turning away from the window. Earlier you said it was easier to join the military if you're a citizen of Surface 4. I presume that just means if you were born here? No, actually, Jack said, and Wilbur looked at him in surprise. I mean, yes, being born here pretty much means you're a citizen, but anyone over the age of 35 was almost definitely not born here. So if you're only defining citizenship as meaning you were born here, you'd be losing over half our population. Wilbur frowned. Why is that? Before Jack could answer, another voice from behind them cut him off. Wilbur! Get your ass over here! They have a library and I know your nerdy ass would like that! Tommy shouted. Glancing over his shoulder, Wilbur spotted Tommy across the hall, waving him towards the door Rambo had been pointing at earlier. It was now open, and through the doorway Wilbur could see gleaming black desks lining the walls, each with a hollow pad resting in the center of it. Holy shit. A library. Maybe they'd have history books on the Antarctic Empire in here. If that was the case, then Wilbur had just hit the jackpot. Abandoning his attempt to get information out of Jack, Wilbur hurried over to the doorway where Tommy was waiting for him. Amesy and Rambu were already inside, and Tommy led him over to the desk Amesy was currently hunched over, the two stopping behind their chair. "What are you reading?" Tommy asked, resting his hands on the back of the chair to lean over their shoulder, trying to see the holopad screen. "Oh! It's a book on flora biology. I actually brought it here. I was just checking on it," Amesy explained, tilting the screen towards the two of them. Wilbur, who already knew plenty about the flora, glanced at the other holopads on the desk. "Are those all different books?" Amesy nodded. "Yup. Each holopad holds a history for books, so you can look through the digital library each one holds and find something you're interested in reading." "Do they have a category for history?" We have plenty of history books," Rambu cut in, giving Wilbur a sheepish smile as he grabbed another holopad and held it out to him. There's a history of Endurians, history of Flosslium. I'm pretty sure there's a book on Blazophane in there, and even a few books on Elytra. Humming, Wilbur tapped on the screen, pulling up a search bar and typing a word into it. Wow, that's interesting stuff. Stuff he wasn't interested in, but stuff he was going to pretend he cared about anyway. Making sure to keep the holopad angled away from Rambu, Wilbur typed in Zephyr's 4 to see if any books came up. After a few seconds of loading, nothing popped up, and Wilbur bit back a sigh as he typed in Antarctic Empire. Still nothing. His annoyance must have flashed across his face, because Rambu then said, "Do you need help finding something specific?" Trying to appear casual, Wilbur shrugged. "Jack just mentioned something about mines here on Zephyr's 4, so I was just trying to look up if you had any history books on this planet itself." At this point, Rambu chuckled. "Oh, you're not gonna find any history books on Zephyr's 4. Wilbur frowned. "Why not?" Because no one's written them yet, Rambu explained, smiling at him. "I know some books are in the process of being written, but according to Techno, it really hasn't been that long since we really became Zephyr's 4, at least in government terms, so there's not a lot to write about just yet." Great. So Wilbur's inability to find any information on Zephyr's 4 wasn't solely because they were a secretive planet, but because there were literally no books written on their history yet. That was annoying. Still, Rambu had mentioned they had history books on the planet Elytra, which wasn't easy information to obtain. It seemed that for the time being that would have to suffice, so with a suppressed sigh, Wilbur settled himself in the desk next to Amesy and pulled up a book on the former planet. "Are you really just gonna sit and read a book right now?" Tommy whined over his shoulder. "What else do you suggest we do?" Wilbur asked, shooting him a pointed look. "It's not exactly like we have anywhere to be." Tommy pouted. "But it's so fucking boring. It's been nearly a week since your last set of lessons, right?" Wilbur suddenly asked, making Tommy's eyes go wide. Well, yeah, but I had plenty of reasons not to do my lessons," Tommy said, chuckling awkwardly. "Well, obviously," Wilbur huffed. "I wasn't saying that, but since we're in a library right now, it might be a good idea for you to try and catch up." Tommy's face scrunched up at that, as if he just tasted something sour. "I don't think that's a good idea." Annoyance sparked through Wilbur, and he tried to shove it down, but it growled back with a vengeance as he looked at Tommy's pouty expression. He didn't want to be a hard ass on him, but given the current situation, Tommy needed this kind of information now more than ever. Tommy, come here, Wilbur said, gesturing for Tommy to come closer. Nervousness danced in his eyes as he crept over, bending down so Wilbur could whisper in his ear. What exactly do you think running around with Rambo and Amesy all day is going to do for you the next time we're trying to negotiate with Filza? Wilbur hissed, narrowing his eyes. It's not going to fucking help anything, that's for sure. Unless you want to make yourself look like the idiotic child I think you are. Tommy winced. But I was just... This isn't a game anymore, Tommy. Wilbur continued, cutting him off. Before you were able to run around and shirk your responsibilities without needing to worry, because you didn't have to know all those things yet. But now you do. We are in a very precarious situation here, and we need to be trying to do everything we can to ensure negotiations go well. There was a moment of silence as Tommy glared at him, jaw clenched and fists hanging at his sides. It was obvious he wanted to argue, but his eyes kept darting between Ainsley and Rambo on either side of them. And Wilbur appreciated that he at least had the tact to recognize that this wasn't the place to get into that kind of discussion. So instead, Tommy let out a breath between his teeth, his shoulders slumping as he forced himself to relax. Then, with one more dirty look shot at Wilbur's way, he sat down at the desk behind him and picked up a hollow pad. What do you want me to read? Tommy asked, his voice robotic. Wilbur ignored the way his dead tone grated against his ears, so flat and wrong and utterly un-Tommy. He leaned over Tommy's shoulder, skimming through the library and pulling up a book on political philosophy he'd read a few years earlier. It wasn't much, but it would give Tommy an idea for some form of strategy while Wilbur tried to figure out if he could make a reading list or something for him. Fuck. A reading list? Wilbur was trained to be an advisor, but he wasn't supposed to be Tommy's tutor. That wasn't Tommy's fault, and Wilbur knew that, but there was yet another spike of annoyance, and he snapped his mouth shut before he got the chance to say anything that would piss Tommy off even more than he already was. As both Wilbur and Tommy turned their focus onto their books, above his head, Wilbur could practically feel the awkward look Amesy and Rambo were sharing. The air was thick with tension, Tommy hunching over like there was an invisible thundercloud storming right above him. They ended up staying in the library for a few hours, although Wilbur struggled to focus on the book in front of him. After the first half hour, Tommy slumped more in his chair, readjusting to get comfortable as he actually got absorbed in the words. Wilbur wished he could have done the same, but his mind was buzzing with too many questions for him to think straight. When were they going to see Filza and Technoblade again? How receptive was he going to be to their refusal to let him control Blazophane? Were either of them going to take Tommy seriously at all? Would they even take Wilbur seriously? Were the other planets going to get involved now that they were aware of what Dream had done to Eldingvegger? If so, what would that look like? Wilbur was relieved when Jack called out to let them know that it was time for dinner. He gratefully set down his hollow pad, and the four of them trailed out in silence. Tommy refused to look at him, and only spoke up after Amesy asked what his favorite food back on Eldingvegger was. Once dinner ended, they parted ways with Amesy and Rambo, letting Jack lead them back to their room, although Wilbur was pretty sure he could get himself there without a guide now. They said quiet goodbyes to Jack, before they both entered their room, the door sliding shut behind Wilbur with a soft hiss. Like a bubble that had been waiting to burst, the second they were alone, Tommy whirled around on him. "Idiotic child! Really?" were the first words out of his mouth. Wilbur blinked. "Is that really what you're hung up on?" Tommy scowled. "Yes! You said Phils and Technoblade view me like an idiotic child!" "Because they do, and I'm pretty sure they view me the same way." Wilbur huffed, taking off his teal coat to hang it in the closet. They'd been given clothes tailored for them specifically the day before, although they were all still in Antarctic fashion and colors for the most part. "And if you keep spending all your time fucking around with your friends, that opinion isn't going to change." "I'm not fucking around. I'm trying to learn the layout of the palace," Tommy exclaimed, glaring at him. "Don't bullshit me. That's only part of it," Wilbur said, rolling his eyes as he sat down on the bed. "You just want to run around with Amesy and Rambu so you can pretend like nothing's wrong." Tommy narrowed his eyes. "I'm not allowed to try and have some fun with the only goddamn friend I have in this palace? Considering we're at the mercy of a ruthless emperor right now, I wouldn't say it's exactly the time to have fun." Wilbur scoffed, anger bubbling inside his chest. "Then when am I allowed to have fun, Wilbur?" Tommy challenged, now pacing the length of the room. "When am I allowed to take a fucking breather? In case you forgot, I was going to be fucking executed less than a week ago!" "I was going to be executed too!" Wilbur shouted, suddenly jumping to his feet. "We were both going to be killed, in case you forgot, and I'm the one who got us out. I'm the one who saved our asses. I'm the one who got us off Eldingberger, and I'm the one who took us to Zephyr's 4. But you don't see me stopping to take a breather. Maybe if you did, you wouldn't have such a stick up your ass." Oh wait, no, that was muttered. "Maybe if you did, you wouldn't have such a stick up your ass," Tommy muttered under his breath. Heat rushed to Wilbur's head as his vision flashed red. He stormed forward, Tommy shrinking back when he saw the anger blazing across Wilbur's face, and winced as Wilbur leaned down so they were face to face. "Why do you think I have a stick up my ass, huh, Tommy?" Wilbur asked, staring Tommy down. "Do you think I want to be harping on you like this? Because I don't. Because I'm trying to keep us alive. What the fuck do you not get about that?" Tommy's face twisted into a snarl, and next thing Wilbur knew, he was stumbling back with the force of Tommy shoving him. "You don't need to be such an asshole about it," Tommy said, glaring at him. Wilbur was clenching his jaw so hard it was starting to ache. "Don't shove me like that again," he warned in a low voice. As if only just realizing what he did, the anger disappeared from Tommy's face for a moment, his eyes going wide with shock. Then, his cheeks flushed red, and his scowl returned as he turned and rushed to the bathroom. "I'm gonna take a shower," he grumbled, slamming the door shut behind him. And just like that, Wilbur was alone. Letting out a shaky breath, he buried his face in his hands, groaning into his palms at how badly that had gone. He meant what he said. He didn't like playing the hard ass, but Tommy was frustrating him to no end. Inside the bathroom, Wilbur heard the water start. He sat back down on the bed, kicking off his shoes and twisting his fingers into his hair. He was exhausted. The waiting was killing him, and all he wanted was to bury himself under his blankets and never come back out because it would be easier than dealing with the absolute shit fest that was his life right then. Drink break. A knock on the door startled him out of his thoughts. Tension threaded itself between Wilbur's shoulders as he got to his feet again, heart pounding in his chest at the possibility that Jack was on the other side, waiting to take him to Philza and Technoblade. He wouldn't call on them this late at night, right? And Tommy was still in the bathroom. They wouldn't take the delay as a slight against the two of them, right? Wilbur took leaden steps to the door, taking a deep breath to try and steady himself before pressing the button to slide it open. Relief practically slammed into Wilbur like a truck when he saw Amesy standing on the other side instead of Jack. "Hi, Will," they said, giving him a small wave. "I hope I'm not bothering you?" Blinking, Wilbur shook his head. "No, not at all. Is something wrong?" "Oh, nothing's wrong. I just wanted to check in on you and Tommy since things seemed a little tense after the library today," they explained, the flowers on their cheeks perking up as they rocked back and forth on their heels. Yeah, it's fine," Wilbur reassured them, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Just usual bickering, you know how it is." Amesy's dark brows furrowed together. "It didn't seem like the way I've seen you two bicker before." "Well, it's been 4 years. Things change," Wilbur pointed out, wincing when his words came out just a bit sharper than he meant them to. Amesy didn't seem bothered by his tone, though. "I'm not blind. I know you and Tommy are both really stressed out." Wilbur huffed. "Yeah, no shit. Our planet got taken over by one power-hungry emperor, and now we're trying to negotiate with another for help. This isn't exactly a vacation for us." So that leads to you snapping at each other, right?" Amesy asked, folding their arms over their chest. Wait, other. There we go. "So that leads to you snapping at each other, right?" Amesy asked, folding their arms over their chest. Leaning against the doorway, Wilbur raised an eyebrow. "Amesy, Tommy's taking a shower right now, so if you want to talk to him, you might as well just wait for tomorrow." At this, Amesy frowned. "You're my friend too, Wilbur. I'm worried about both of you." "I appreciate the sentiment, but it's not your concern." It is my concern, though. You're both my friends, and you're dealing with a lot right now, and it's not the concern for someone who is a part of the Antarctic Empire." Wilbur snapped, cutting them off. Amesy fell silent, understanding dawning over their face. A beat passed as they stared at one another, before Amesy took a step back. "So that's what this is about," they said quietly. "You don't trust me. It's nothing personal, but we haven't seen you in 4 years. We're quite literally in the middle of negotiations with the Emperor at the moment, so forgive me for not wanting to spill all my thoughts to another member of the Empire," Wilbur said, meeting their eyes steadily. For a moment, hurt flashed over Amesy's face. Their flowers drooped, and their eyes ducked to the ground as they curled in on themselves. Guilt panged in Wilbur's chest, but he wasn't lying when he said that, and he didn't intend on taking it back. After a few beats, Amesy straightened their shoulders again. "That's fine. I get it. Kinda hurts, but I understand where you're coming from. There's not a lot of people you can trust right now," they said, fiddling with the hem of their sleeve. "Just try not to be too hard on Tommy, okay? I think this whole thing is bothering him a lot more than he's letting on, so just keep that in mind." Wilbur narrowed his eyes. "I think I know my own brother better than you, but thanks." To Amesy's credit, they didn't flinch at this and just nodded. "Fair enough. Try to take care of yourself Try to take care of yourself too, though. If you ever just want to complain, you don't have to tell me details. But like I said, I'm not only Tommy's friend. And with that, Amesy turned and headed back down the hallway, their footsteps fading into silence. Wilbur shut the door once more, before collapsing onto his side of the bed with a loud grunt. He dragged his hands down his face, one part of his mind screaming at him for being rude to the only friend they had on this entire planet, while the other part praised him for being cautious of them. He didn't trust Amesy. Not fully. But he trusted them more than he trusted anyone else in the entire palace besides Tommy. Hopefully he hadn't just ruined that. It wasn't long before the water from the shower stopped. Wilbur didn't react as the door to the bathroom opened, only kept his eyes on the ceiling as he watched Tommy rub a towel on his head from his peripheral vision. Have a nice shower? Wilbur tried after Tommy had tossed the towel aside. Tommy didn't say anything. He climbed under the blankets, keeping his back to Wilbur as he settled his wet hair onto the pillow. Are you ignoring me now? Wilbur asked, pushing himself up on his pillow. Silence. Well, guess that answered that question. Sighing, Wilbur got off the bed to change into his own pajamas. Then, he climbed under the blankets, watching Tommy's back as his shoulders rose and fell in a steady rhythm. He wasn't sleeping, Wilbur could tell that much, but he was pretending to be asleep. Maybe Wilbur should have tried to apologize, but all his anger and frustration from earlier was still tangled up in his chest into a tight ball, one that he was too exhausted to try and unwrap at this time. So he shut the lights off and settled his own head on the pillow, turning onto his side so they were both facing away from the other. Night, Tommy, Wilbur said into the empty air. Still no response. Shutting his eyes, Wilbur did his breathing exercises until the waves stopped crashing over and over again in his mind. Then he let himself drift off to sleep. Wilbur was woken by a scream. Bolting upright in the dark room, Wilbur's thoughts were bleary with sleep as he tried to make out shapes in the shadows. His heart was pounding wildly in his ears as he looked around for the source of the sound, whipping his head from side to side until he noticed the trembling figure sitting next to him. Tommy, what's wrong? Tommy took a shuddering breath, followed by a few short gasps. It took Wilbur's half-asleep brain a second to process this, but then he realized Tommy was crying. Hey, what's going on? Wilbur asked, his voice softer this time. I'm sorry, Tommy gasped out, words muffled by the hands he had on his face. I didn't want to wake you up. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Wilbur saw that Tommy was curled into a ball with his hands around his knees, while his shoulders trembled violently. You don't need to apologize. What's going on? A hiccup bubbled out of Tommy's chest. Nightmare, he whispered. A pang shot through Wilbur's chest hearing that. He reached out, but hesitated before he went to pull Tommy's hands away from his face. Is Touch okay? Tommy peeked out from behind his hands, the soft glow of his freckles making the tears in his eyes glitter. Then he nodded once, and Wilbur reached out to grab Tommy's hands in his own. But before he could do that, Tommy suddenly launched himself at Wilbur, and Wilbur grunted in with surprise as Tommy wrapped his arms around him in one of the tightest hugs he'd ever given him. I'm sorry I shoved you. Tommy sobbed into his shirt, the words coming out a garbled mess. I know you're trying to help, but I'm just being a fucking asshole. Hey, it's okay, Wilbur whispered, cutting Tommy off as he ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry too. I was definitely harder on you than I should have been. This just made Tommy cry harder, and Wilbur tried to comfort him the best he could. He readjusted so that he was sitting against the headboard of the bed, with Tommy having buried his face in his shoulder while twisting his fingers into Wilbur's shirt. There, nagging in the back of Wilbur's head, telling him that there had to be something more. There was nagging in the back of Wilbur's head, telling him that there had to be something more going on, because Tommy wouldn't be this upset about the fight they had earlier. Not when they'd had fights far worse than that before. There had to be more to it. Are you okay? I didn't think our fight was that bad, Wilbur asked, keeping his voice as slow and gentle as he could. Tommy said something in response, but Wilbur couldn't make out what it was since his face was still buried in his shirt. What was that? Can you say that again? Pulling his head out from Wilbur's shoulder, Tommy sniffled once, letting go of his shirt to wipe some of the snot off his nose. The dream I had. Another sniffle. It was bad. Really bad. Wilbur frowned. Bad in what way? With the glow of Tommy's freckles, Wilbur could just make out his little brother's lower lip trembling as he stared into Wilbur's eyes. It was... His breathing hitched. It was you. Dream, I was stuck and he'd been caught and I couldn't move and he just... Another gasp for breath. He killed you, Wilbur, right in front of me. I couldn't do anything to stop it. Oh. Neither one of them had nightmares about the invasion since they'd gotten out of the crawl space, but Wilbur supposed it was only a matter of time. Oh, Tommy, Wilbur whispered, guilt crashing over him as he pulled Tommy close again. Tommy crumbled into him, more sobs breaking out from his chest as Wilbur rested his chin on top of his head. I'm right here. It's fine. Dream can't get us here. But even if he can, feels like he could kill us. Tommy cried. Wilbur winced. That was painfully true. At the moment, Filza has no reason to kill us, Wilbur said in a weak attempt at reassurance. And as long as we're smart, we won't give him a reason, okay? Tommy nodded, the shaking in his shoulders slowing down. I'm sorry if I scared you earlier, Wilbur continued, twirling a blonde curl around his finger. I was just trying to get my point across, but I think I got a little too intense about it. It's okay, Tommy told him. You were a bit of an asshole, but I was too. Wilbur snorted softly. Guess you take after me in that way. I think you're a bit bitchier than me, Tommy teased, the tears having stopped entirely now. Excuse me, you're the rude one of the two of us, Wilbur shot back, making sure to keep his voice low even as they joked. Yeah, but you're more petty than I am. Wilbur rolled his eyes, even though Tommy couldn't see it in the dark. That's fair. Nikki always said I was. He cut himself off at the mention of Nikki, while Tommy stiffened in his arms. Anxiety crawled up his throat as he thought back to the betrayal in their eyes, and his chest ached as he buried his face in Tommy's hair. "Do you think Nikki's okay?" Tommy whispered, curling back into him. "I'm sure she is," Wilbur said, although the words sounded clunky and false, even to himself. Dream wouldn't risk pissing Themis off by hurting her. I used to think Dream wouldn't go after Eldenvega because he wouldn't want to fuck up the Basaphane trade, and look where that got us, Tommy muttered, making Wilbur's chest squeeze. Ignoring the rock that dropped into his stomach at that. Sorry. Wilbur leaned further back against his pillow, keeping Tommy tucked into his side. All we can do right now is hope for the best. Tommy made a disgruntled noise as he readjusted himself, his nose tucked into Wilbur's shoulder. "I don't like that plan." "I don't like it either," Wilbur whispered. Another few days passed before they finally got the summons they'd been waiting for. Leaving Ainsley and Rambu behind, Wilbur and Tommy followed Jack to the negotiations room again. Since their fight, Tommy was trying to be better about reading the things Wilbur told him to, but he got distracted very easily, so he hadn't been making much progress. Unfortunately, Wilbur hadn't been making much progress either. Every time he tried to sit down and read, all he could think about were all the ways their negotiations could go wrong. Now that they were going to see Phil's and Technoblade again, it was near impossible for Wilbur to just focus on breathing. Fear slid between his ribs, ice cold like a shock to the system. Tommy was pressed against his side as they walked, and despite the neutral mask that was plastered over his face, Wilbur could read the lines of tension in his jaws clear as day. Much like last time, when they entered the room, Philza and Technoblade were already waiting for them. Philza was still seated, while Techno was standing this time, resting his hand on the back of a chair and watching the brothers with narrowed eyes. Something that immediately set Wilbur on edge was the fact that, unlike before, there wasn't the faintest hint of a smile on Philza's face. Instead, his cold eyes practically pierced through Wilbur as he gestured for them to sit. "Okay, let's not waste any time with the bullshit today," Philza said, before either Wilbur or Tommy could say anything in greeting. To put it bluntly, we're going to have to put our negotiations on hold for quite a bit. Wilbur tensed in his seat. Why? Did something happen? "Well, not much has happened yet," Technoblade clarified, "but something is going to be happening very soon that's going to delay things. Zephyr's 4 is holding a diplomatic conference with several planets that are under Antarctic rule, along with our closest allies," Philza continued, tapping his talons on the table. "Since the news about Eldenvega became public information, I informed my territories about our allies and the fact that you and your brother have taken refuge with me. Naturally, this opened up a lot of questions, and I realized it would be a good idea to discuss my plans with the other planets within my empire before we proceed with our own negotiations." "Wait, what? You told others that we're here?" Tommy asked before Wilbur could. "Are you fucking crazy? Dream's gonna find out!" "It doesn't matter if Dream knows you're here or not," Technoblade cut in. "He's not going to attack Zephyr's 4, no matter how much of an arrogant idiot he is. We could tell him exactly what room in the palace you're both staying in, and he wouldn't be able to do a thing. But if it's any reassurance, those I have told are people who I trust won't go running their mouths off," Philza explained, his wings stretching out again behind him. You both being here wasn't going to stay secret for long. Especially not now, considering diplomats are going to be arriving for the summit in a few days. Wilbur blinked, the full weight of Phil's words hitting him all at once. So they're coming here? Philza nodded. Yes. We're still finalizing who is going to show up, but there are going to be quite a few conferences in the coming week. Ones that you both are going to be expected to show up to, alongside myself and Techno. Why us? Tommy asked, frowning at Philza. Because everyone wants to know what happened on Eldingvega, and right now, you are the only two people we know of who escaped the takeover. Oh wait, no, that was Techno. Because everyone wants to know what happened on Eldingvega, and right now, you are the only two people we know of who escaped the takeover. Technoblade explained, a few of the strands in his braids having fallen loose over his face. Not to mention, Prince Theseus is the heir, so he is the one who will need to speak on your planet's behalf. Will these be a continuation of our negotiations? Wilbur then questioned. Not exactly. I need to go over my own plans regarding the negotiations with the other leaders before we push forward with our discussions. Philza answered, meeting Wilbur's eyes head on. All you two need to do is present and be ready to answer questions. Though I'm sure you recognize the opportunities meeting so many different planet leaders would provide you, right, Prince Orpheus? Yes. Wilbur did recognize the opportunities this would open. Potential allies, or potential enemies, depending on how well these discussions went. A chance to gain a larger political foothold in the galaxy outside of the influence of Zephyrus 4, although they wouldn't be that far from Phil's influence, given that all these planets were under either Antarctic rule or allied with the Empire itself. Still, it was a chance to learn and make connections. This opportunity was invaluable. We are grateful to you for allowing us to participate in these conferences, Wilbur said, not breaking eye contact with Philza as he spoke. We'll make sure to take the full advantage of what it can provide us with. And then, there was Philza's razor-sharp smile once more. I knew you would. Despite the dangerous glint in Philza's eyes, for just the briefest of moments, Wilbur could have sworn there was something like pride in the Emperor's voice. Not a warm kind of pride, though. No, this pride is almost akin to jealousy, but not quite bitter enough for it. It was the kind of pride a predator would have after a successful hunt, as it dragged around a carcass that could keep its family fed for weeks. But as quickly as it was there, it was gone. Wilbur did his best to convince himself he'd imagined it, but the shudder running down his spine said otherwise. Oh, man! Good chapter. This is definitely getting more interesting to me. Wait, how many chapters are there so far? 1 second. Chapter index. Oh, there's only 10 chapters so far. I was debating whether or not to read the second chapter of Choice of Robots today, but I'm a bit tired. Excuse me. So, I think that is going to be my stream. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm sorry that my stream crashed, my PC crashed. I still have no idea what happened. Alright.
be sure to leave a follow if you're new. If you want to follow me on any of my other socials or join my Discord, click !socials in my chat and it'll show you my link tree. And I don't think I'll be streaming either tomorrow or Friday because I have work. We'll see about Saturday. I might stream Saturday. But whenever the next stream is, I will see you then. Alright.